Rain hit the windows of Rosie's all-night diner like small stones. The clock on the wall said 11:47 p.m. 6 men stood inside, and every one of them had a gun pointed at the same table. At that table sat a man in a black coat. His name was Dante Reyes, and 3 days ago, the whole city had called him untouchable. Tonight, he sat alone in a booth, his hands flat on the table, his face calm but his eyes moving fast between the 6 guns aimed at his chest. His 2 bodyguards were already on the floor, tied with kitchen wire, mouths covered with tape. The diner door was locked from the inside. The only sound was the rain, the hum of the old refrigerator, and the slow breathing of a man who knew he might die in the next 60 seconds. "You look smaller than I imagined," said the man standing closest to him. His name was Marco Sands, and he was smiling the way a man smiles when he has already won. "Big Dante Reyes, king of the East Side. Now look at you, trapped like a rat in a cheap diner." Dante said nothing. He was waiting, watching, counting. What none of the 6 men noticed, what none of them even thought to notice, was the young waitress standing quietly behind the counter, wiping the same coffee cup again and again. She had curvy curves under her plain apron, soft brown eyes, and a calm, almost bored expression on her face, like none of this concerned her at all. But her eyes were not bored. Her eyes were watching every single man in that room, measuring distances, counting weapons, reading footwork. In the next 10 minutes, 6 armed gangsters would learn a lesson they would never forget, and it would not come from the Mafia boss they had trapped. It would come from her. To understand how this night happened, we must go back 2 hours earlier, before the guns, before the silence, before everything changed inside that small diner on the edge of the highway. Dante Reyes had built his name through patience, not noise. While other bosses liked gold watches and loud cars, Dante preferred quiet rooms and careful words. He ran the Reyes family business from the east side of the city, controlling shipping routes, warehouses, and a dozen small businesses that nobody ever questioned. He was smart. He was careful. And for almost 10 years, nobody had been able to touch him. But 3 weeks ago, things had changed. Dante's men had taken control of a smuggling route that used to belong to another crew, a rough, violent group known as the Vultures, led by a man named Marco Sands. Sands had built his name on fear, not patience. Losing that route meant losing money, and losing money meant losing respect on the streets. Sands wanted it back. More than that, he wanted Dante to pay for taking it. Tonight, Dante had received a message from an old friend, someone he trusted, asking for a quiet meeting far from the city, away from cameras and away from his usual guarded buildings. The message said it was about peace between the 2 crews. Dante, always looking for a way to avoid more bloodshed, agreed. He chose Rosie's all-night diner, a small, half-forgotten place near the highway exit, the kind of spot nobody would think twice about. He should have asked more questions. He should have wondered why his old friend never showed up. What Dante did not know was that one of his own men, a young driver named Vinny, had been selling information to Marco Sands for the past 2 months. Vinny was tired of being small. He wanted more money, more respect, and Sands had promised him both. It was Vinny who told Sands exactly where Dante would be, and exactly when he would be alone. Dante walked into the diner that night, with only 2 bodyguards, expecting a peaceful conversation. He had no idea he was walking into a trap built just for him. The diner itself was almost empty at that hour. An old trucker sat near the door, eating eggs slowly. The cook worked quietly in the back kitchen, and behind the counter stood the new waitress, a woman who had been working there for about 6 months. Her name, according to everyone who knew her, was Lola. Nobody in town knew much about Lola's past. She kept to herself, smiled at the regulars, remembered everyone's orders, and never talked about where she came from. Some of the older customers liked to joke that she moved like a dancer, light on her feet, always balanced, always aware of where everything in the room was. Nobody thought much of it. She was just a waitress. Friendly, quiet, forgettable. That was exactly how she wanted it. At 11:30 p.m., the diner door swung open, and 6 men walked in together. The old trucker near the door barely looked up from his eggs. Lola noticed everything at once, the way the men spread out instead of grouping together, the bulges under their jackets, the way their eyes moved straight to Dante's booth without searching the rest of the room. These men already knew exactly where their target was sitting. Within seconds, two of the men grabbed Dante's bodyguards from behind. There was a short struggle, a muffled shout, and then silence as both guards were tied up and pushed to the floor. The trucker near the door was told, in a low and dangerous voice, to put his head down and stay quiet if he wanted to keep breathing. The old man did exactly that. The cook in the back kitchen heard nothing over the sound of his radio, and Lola stood behind the counter, still holding her coffee cup, still wiping it slowly, watching everything unfold with calm, careful eyes. Marco Sands walked straight up to Dante's booth, a wide, satisfied grin on his face. Four of his men spread around the small dining area, guns drawn but lowered, ready to be raised the moment they were needed. The sixth man stood by the locked front door, making sure nobody could leave, and nobody could enter. "You should have given back what was mine," Sands said, sliding into the seat across from Dante without being invited. "Instead, you made me come all this way, on a rainy night, just to remind you who really runs these streets." "You're making a mistake," Dante said quietly. His voice did not shake. "Killing me here, in a public diner, will bring more trouble than you can handle. My people will come looking. The police will come looking. You'll lose everything you're trying to protect." Sands laughed, low and rough. "Your people don't even know you're here, Dante. Nobody does. Not even your closest men." He leaned forward. "I made sure of that." Dante's jaw tightened slightly. He understood now. Someone close to him had betrayed his location. He filed that thought away for later, if there was a later. "Any last words, Big Boss?" Sands asked, raising his gun slowly, aiming it directly at Dante's forehead. The other four men in the room raised their weapons as well, all aimed at the same target, ready to finish the job the moment Sands gave the word. It was at that exact moment that Lola set down her coffee cup. "Excuse me," she said, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the tension in the room. "Would anyone like a refill before this gets messy?" Every head in the diner turned toward her. For one strange second, even Sands looked confused, like he had forgotten the waitress was even there. "Sit down and shut up," one of the gunmen near the counter snapped, waving his pistol toward her. "This doesn't concern you." Lola smiled softly. "Actually," she said, "it concerns me a great deal." And then everything happened very fast. The moment the gunman near the counter took half a step toward her, Lola moved. She grabbed the hot coffee pot from the warmer and threw the scalding liquid directly into his face. He screamed and stumbled backward, dropping his gun. Before his weapon even hit the floor, Lola had already vaulted over the counter, landing low and balanced, like she had done it 100 times before. The man closest to the door turned at the sound of a scream, but he was too slow. Lola crossed the distance in 3 quick steps and struck him hard in the throat with the side of her hand. He gasped, unable to breathe, and crumpled against the locked door. A third gunman finally raised his weapon toward her, but Lola was already moving, ducking under his arm and twisting it sharply behind his back until something cracked. His gun fell from numb fingers, and she shoved him face first into a nearby table, sending plates and silverware crashing to the floor. Sands spun around in shock, his gun no longer pointed at Dante, but searching wildly for the woman who had just taken down 3 of his men in under 10 seconds. "What is she?" he shouted at his remaining men. "Shoot her! Shoot her now!" The fourth gunman fired, but Lola had already dropped low behind an overturned table, using it as cover. From beneath her apron, she pulled a small folded blade she had kept hidden against her thigh for months, waiting, hoping she would never need it again, but ready all the same. She moved like smoke around the edge of the table, and within seconds, the fourth gunman was disarmed and pinned face down on the floor, his arm twisted at an angle that made him beg her to stop. That left only Marco Sands and the sixth man, the one who had been guarding the door. Sands backed away, his gun shaking slightly in his hand as he stared at Lola. "Who are you?" he demanded, sweat forming on his forehead despite the cold night outside. "Who sent you?" Lola straightened up slowly, her apron stained, her breathing steady despite everything that had just happened. For the first time that night, something cold and sharp flickered behind her calm brown eyes. "You don't remember me." she said quietly. "But I remember you." Sands frowned, confused, still pointing his gun toward her, though his hand was no longer steady. 5 years ago," Lola continued, "a young man was found dead in a warehouse on the South Docks. He was 23 years old. He had a job interview the next morning. He had a sister who loved him more than anything in the world." Her voice did not rise, but it grew harder, heavier. "You were the one who pulled the trigger that night, Marco. I never forgot your face." Sands's eyes widened. He took a step back, his gun hand trembling. "I left that life behind after my brother died," Lola said. "I trained for years to become someone who could protect people instead of losing them. I came to this town to disappear, to start over, to forget. I never expected to find you walking through that door tonight." She tilted her head slightly. "But I'm glad I did." Before Sands could decide whether to run or shoot, Lola closed the distance between them in a blur of motion. She knocked the gun from his hand with one sharp strike, swept his legs out from under him, and had him pinned to the floor before he even understood what had happened. The last remaining gunman by the door tried to flee, but Dante, finally free to move, grabbed a heavy ketchup bottle from the counter and knocked him out cold with one solid swing. Silence returned to the diner, broken only by the rain outside and the groans of 6 defeated men scattered across the floor. Dante stood slowly, staring at Lola with a mixture of shock and deep respect. "Who exactly are you?" he asked, echoing Sands's earlier question, though his tone held none of the fear. Lola wiped a strand of hair from her face and allowed herself a small, tired smile. "Just a waitress," she said. "One who used to be something else, a long time ago." She explained, briefly and honestly, that she had once served in an elite special operations unit before personal tragedy pushed her out of that world. She had taken a quiet job at the diner to live a simple, unnoticed life, far away from violence and revenge. She never expected her past and her present to collide in such a small, ordinary place. Dante looked down at Marco Sands, still pinned beneath Lola's knee, groaning in pain and defeat. "He came here to kill me because one of my own men sold me out," Dante said quietly, more to himself than to her. "I'll deal with that betrayal soon enough." "That's your world," Lola said simply. "Mine is just trying to live in peace." Dante studied her for a long moment, then reached into his coat and pulled out a thick envelope of cash, offering it to her as both payment and apology for the chaos that had unfolded in her workplace. "Whatever you want," he said. "A new life somewhere safer. A place in my organization, if you wanted it. Anything." Lola gently pushed his hand back, refusing the money. "I don't want your world, Mr. Reyes," she said. "I just want a closure. Tonight, I finally got it." She untied the trucker by the door, who was still trembling but unharmed, and quietly told him everything would be fine. Then she walked to the kitchen, calmly informed the cook that there had been a bit of an incident up front, and asked him to call the police once she was gone. By the time the first police car arrived 20 minutes later, 6 gangsters lay tied up with the same wire they had used on Dante's bodyguards, Marco Sands among them, finally facing the consequences of the violence he had built his life upon. Dante gave a brief statement, leaving out certain details, and quietly slipped away before too many questions could be asked. Lola was already gone. Dante never saw her again after that night, though he never forgot her. He dealt with Vinny's betrayal in his own quiet way, tightening his circle, trusting fewer people, moving more carefully through the dangerous world he ruled. The story of the Curvy Waitress who took down 6 armed gangsters alone became a quiet legend on the streets, whispered about in bars and back rooms, though nobody who repeated it ever knew her real name. Some say she eventually opened a small diner of her own in another town, far from both her old life and Dante's dangerous world. Others say she simply vanished, choosing peace over recognition, exactly as she had always wanted. Either way, one thing remained certain in every version of the story. In a small, rain-soaked diner on the edge of the highway, 6 dangerous men learned a hard lesson that night. Never judge a quiet woman by her apron, her smile, or the coffee pot in her hand. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody bothers to notice.